Jacksonville. The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talked for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
On the 23rd of February 2019, this is The Week That Was from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. Very interesting week. We've just concluded. The South African nation is having their election today. It was put 1 week behind, but that has been a recurring situation before it has been postponed. So not a big deal there, but part of the problem is that people in South Africa have to walk or take buses or planes. It's a vast country, and the whole idea the day was off today, but at the same time it is a situation whereby they are stressed because on this particular day they don't permit driving. So in other words, you have to already be in the location for the polling episode. So some people that had come long distances will not, and I'm assuming they don't have a mail-in ballot mechanism there. It's very unfortunate, and they don't have internet voting, anything in that nature. But it could be accomplished by using smartphones, even using analog phones, or in the villages, and a mixture of both. So this is one of the real things that happens when you're having voting. As one professor said, the preference situation. Now, in the U.S., we're coming back to the U.S. Well, one other thing, in Venezuela, under President Nicolas Maduro, they had some dueling concerts, I should say. A Billionaire from London, the Virgin Empire there, Bronson, had a conference. I guess you could call it a concert. I wonder, was he giving away free refreshments? Who knows? Anyway, they got some bands there, etc., and tried to put it as a live aid. This shows you the condition of modern capitalism. No place else would they have a concert, bringing in bands, paying for bands, to try to influence a government. The overthrow, that is, of a government, and they've got the coalition, I suppose you'd call it the willing. When you start looking at these so-called coalition, most of the world is not represented. There, you have the usual suspects in Europe, the old colonial types, Canada, and a few other little smaller nations thrown in to, as they say, make the pizza dough look like it's palatable. But in actuality, It is not very palatable. The border with Brazil is closed now, and evidently there was some skirmishes there. Now, we got some reports that 2 people were dead. That's what the Washington Post said, and some others. Other reports, 1 person was dead, and evidently they did some forensics on who fired the bullets, and evidently the bullets did not come from the weaponry of the Venezuelan security forces, that it came from others. And this is one of the big problems when you have this type of border situation, that it's easy for someone to fire a gun within a crowd, particularly if it's a very large crowd. You could either have a provocateur that would fire at the Venezuelan security forces, or you could have someone in the crowd that would just shoot someone in the crowd indiscriminately. So that situation there, I suppose, is in limbo. The self-appointed president, now even the corporate media is calling himself that. He appointed himself, Mr. Guaido, as in Colombia. How he got there, he said, well, did he go by bus with some of the other legislators, a caravan they call it, or did he fly in? Well, there's still plane flights that one could take. Venezuela is a vast country. He could have driven somewhere and took whatever, or who knows where he was, and walked across the border, or he could have just went in simply in disguise. That's probably how he went. That's his MO, going in disguise. But today the border will be between Colombia and Venezuela will be partially closed. I'm not certain how they will handle that. Incidentally, the government of Venezuela had their own hands-off Venezuela concert. So there were 2 concerts within a few kilometers of each other on different sides of the border. Now, the city that they have talked about, that the materials are in, is a city of about 1 million people, but a lot of it is shanty towns. So it appears to me some of that quote-unquote Yankee aid should be distributed there in Colombia, because the people in those shanty towns are not doing that well. But this whole situation is surplus food, is scraps, whatever you want to call it, from the masters at table, is what they are offering, when in fact the boycott of Venezuela, primarily by the U.S. and its cronies, have cost them billions of dollars, and it's what prevents them from getting medical supplies and food stuff in. There are tons, however, of medical supplies coming in from the Russian Federation and others. So there will be supplies coming into Venezuela. There will be food coming into Venezuela. It just needs a united effort. Now, remember now, virtually 3/4 of the world is not in this so-called sanction program of the U.S. So there's a lot of people out there that aren't. The Venezuelans still have valuable resources to trade. Their petroleum products. They also have gold and other minerals that can be traded, and you can assume the Russian Federation has their eyes on those minerals and deposits there, and whatever bartering situation they have, the Putin regime has an interest in it. So they will continue, as they say, to exploit their particular interests. And this is what is amazing. I've been watching the Miami Herald and their Spanish edition there in Florida, where the quote-unquote exile community, those are people primarily, not all, that have left Venezuela and have taken their fruits, have gotten fruits with them. So in other words, they've taken the money out, they stole the money, and they're there. In fact, there was one general that said that they should bring democracy, their former general, I should say, one that the U.S. listed as a drug trafficker. So in other words, this is a crooked operation from the very beginning, and the only thing Mr. Juan Guaido wants to do is privatize some of those key industries. That has been played out in the former Soviet Union, when the bourgeois forces took over there, Yeltsin and company. They stole some of the better enterprises. Of course, they've gotten back on Putin. He's taken them back. But the same thing happened in the GDR, what's known as East Germany, that the factories that were in good shape were sold off for pennies on a dollar, basically. And that exploitation is there. And that's what they want to do in Venezuela. Venezuela was at one time a very wealthy country for those that were wealthy. But there was always a tremendous amount of poor people in the country, just as in Colombia. All of these countries cannot sustain their people more than perhaps about 70%. Incidentally, we have a Numbers Man program coming up this weekend. That's our macroeconomics program. We'll be talking about the GDP that will come out next week. It's at below 3%. DJ Trump at one time had, and many of the forecasters, 3+%, 3.5, perhaps even 4. You can have that for a quarter. I don't want to get too far off of there. And we also have special program, incidentally, for African history. A month we've not kept taken our eyes off of that particular prize. And we'll have some programs somewhere thrown in here in the last days that we'll be at the Blog Talk radio, because they're changing their configuration, we'll call it. The slot that we have will no longer be available, and from what we understand, they're doing two things. They're keeping their quote-unquote Blog Talk radio there at a pro forma place, but at the same time they've transferred their own by the same company that has Spreaker. So in other words, they are consolidating that, as at the same time Internet radio itself is consolidating. The recent moves from Spotify and buying a aggregator, I think it's called Anchor, which will also host your I went up there, and we'll push some broadcasts up on Anchor. It's just an aggregator. You deposit your programs there, sort of like some others we have scattered all over the web. Anyway, that's enough for that. What we're going to use here to piggyback behind to the billionaires, Uncle Carl Rove, he's writing his Wall Street Journal on the 21st of February. Every billionaire is a policy mistake. If you are not, it's not your parents' Democratic Party. This has been a continuing theme, and it will be a theme of the 2020 election, that the Democrats are a bunch of rascals, radicals, that their proposals are radical. Well, by the very definition of radical, if you go to the epistemology of it, based on the 2016 election in the continual 50 states called the USA, and what has been happening here in terms of a evolutionary situation. The late great Jerry Pippin, former broadcast partner, died 3 years ago, talked about that and the move to a single payer. In fact, he and I debated it. Not the idea of single payer itself. Actually, what we wanted was nationalization of the healthcare system. We've been talking about that since the day that I stood with Dr. Spock, the baby doctor, for those that remember our age, in the 60s. Anyway, Dr. Spock and we were talking about national health care at that time, and in every nation it's a little different situation that it takes. In Canada it takes one particular pattern, and in the UK they have the National Healthcare Service. Now, along with the National Healthcare Service, they do have private medical facilities, as they do also in Canada. But the whole idea behind, and there's various programs out there, single payer, Medicare for all, it's usually called that there has to be some sort of national program. Now, the Medicare for all, the federal government, like they do for unemployment insurance, etc., you would be there would be a deduction under the FICA regime, I'm assuming, and that would take care of your medical care. And you would not have a reason to have private insurance. Now, would private insurance disappear? Perhaps not, because as we have with Medicare, and we can attest to that, you have what's called supplemental insurance to cover things that Medicare does not cover, like prescription drugs. They do cover prescription drugs, sorry about that. Eyeglasses, hearing aids. I don't have a hearing aid. I do occasionally wear glasses, but anyway, those sorts of things, and also dental services. So there are some things, plus they have the donut. That would be cleaned up. Those are what we usually call side issues. A lot of that would be cleaned up in a final bill. Will a final bill achieve what is put into campaigns? No. In a campaign, one has to understand that you are propagandizing behind issues or quote-unquote policies. You can call them whatever you wish. But the whole idea, Bernie Sanders was talking about this in 2016. That's almost 4 years ago. And in 2015, he's been talking about it for a very, very long time. So it's nothing new there. And back to Uncle Carl's article here, he's disparaging Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just said a top 8 every billionaire is a policy mistake. That view has been replaced by a deep hostility to wealth, and a new outlook is the best captured in the tweet. Well, in the tweet. You have to understand that the whole campaign of, I'm not sure where Uncle Carl was, but the whole campaign of DJ Trump, what did DJ Trump promise on Twitter? Drain the swamp. He was talking about special interests when he started his campaign out. His campaign gravitated from, when he started out, from a quote-unquote more of a centrist campaign to a sharp center-right campaign because of the types of people that were in the Republican Party in which he was running on, such as social issues, dealing with transgender people, etc., dealing with abortions, the so-called evangelical types that are in there. But what he incorporated in, and they were always in there, but the white nationalists, he decided to run a nationalist program. And as he congratulated Bernie on the trade thing, but he just took it forward. Well, the problem with the trade mechanism, what Bernie was talking about, was a little bit different. What Trump has done is, yes, they are redoing the NAFTA, but at the same time, there are holes in the NAFTA that do not favor working people, farmers, etc., people of color, young people, and all that. So in other words, didn't accomplish what it should have accomplished. And some of the other, the Asian trade pact, he escaped that. We commend him on doing that. He did not fall for that trick. But at the same time, this enormous inequality, and this is the whole thing about billionaires. He cites here Bill Gates. Well, Bill Gates made billions, made $1 billion or billions of dollars or whatever. So did the owner of the Washington Post and Amazon, Bezos. Made money, but how did he make the money? And that's the question you have to ask. And Steve Jobs, we don't even want to talk about him. He made it on a proprietary system known as an iPhone, proprietary computers that they were able to sell at a ridiculous cost, and the human cost of that. You have to remember, Apple, no matter what it is, I noticed some of their developers showed some backbone. They don't want to make military weapons. These are these enhanced glasses, virtual type glasses. But there is some coming, but they're still not unionized. Nor is Bezos and his billion-dollar enterprise. They are not unionized. And his Amazon operations, known as sweatshop, they literally had people taken away by emergency vehicle in New England. The heat in the plants, the speed ups that they have to go through working with humans and robots. Eventually the robots will replace the humans, but at this time they need the humans to put it in their little bins, so to speak, and they're rushing around the place there. It's ridiculous. But that's how the money was made. Now, to Gates, it was a different situation. Gates was able to monopolize an operating system, primarily, called DOS, then later Windows, which you have as now some people do. Now he's in the clouds with all of his stuff. But that's how the money was initially made. When they moved from Albuquerque, I was living in Seattle at the time. By the time they made it to Seattle, I had made it to New York. So, and then we were back in Boston. But the whole deal was that this is how the money was made. So when you start talking about billionaires, I notice Uncle Carl does not mention his friends, the Koch brothers. Democrats running for president echo the theme, I want the billionaires to stop being freeloaders. It says Elizabeth Warren. Well, Bernie Sanders alleges America is owned and controlled by a small number of multi-millionaires. No doubt about that, especially billionaires. What these characters have done, Adelson, old casino Adelson out in Vegas, and various others that have accumulated millions and millions of dollars. Well, what they've done is they've set aside some of their millions of dollars and spend it on the Citizens United. They can put PACs together and spend as much as they want to influence you how to vote. And they have their lackeys in the corporate media and various others and politicians to put out there. Gillibrand, she's from New York, is senator there. The head of the Pfizer pharmaceutical organization, is hosting some fundraiser for her. But this is the problem that you have, and this is the reason that these billionaires are being pointed out, because at one time you only had a few, a John D. Rockefeller here and a John D. Rockefeller there, which set up later philanthropy. Now, most of this philanthropy ended up being like Bill Gates, so then Rockefeller did pass out dimes to people. I guess that would be, what now, a $20 bill probably, or maybe more than that. But anyway, it says it doesn't matter, back to Uncle Carl, that Bill Gates is number 2 on the Forbes 400 list of the wealthiest Americans, and his team invented the operating system. They didn't invent the operating system. Let's get this straight. There was an operating system. They had what was called BASIC, and IBM had something at the time was called PC-DOS. IBM was getting out of the software business more and more at that time. So effectively what they did was they conceded PC-DOS to Gates, because at the time they didn't particularly have that vision together what the personal computer was. They wanted to sell the hardware. They had been selling mainframes. And at the time the tradition was when you sold mainframes, mini computers, whether you wanted 6,000 units, you gave the operating system away. You were selling hardware. So they were still stuck in that day. And Gates, through various schemes with some of the manufacturers like Intel, bundled DOS, bundled Windows, forced the resellers, I was in that, I understand that, to buy the operating systems. Now these were the Dells of the world and these people. But the smaller time resellers like us had to buy what was called OEM DOS, original manufactured DOS or whatever, our Windows actually, and so forth and so on. Before that we had something called GN. Anyway, was Steve Jobs on Where Was the Fortune He Left His Widow? Well, yes, number 20 on the list. It was accumulated by popularizing the personal computer, the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad. You don't hear as much of the iPad anymore. But yes, really what the popularization came along is when IBM came out with theirs, and then you had what was called IBM compatible computers. That the 886 machine, I don't want to get too much into this, and consider Bezos. We've already talked about Bezos. How many jobs he created? Yes, he created a lot of jobs. 500,000 jobs and still counting. Microsoft has 131,000 jobs. Apple has 132,000, about the same. Yeah, they created jobs and destroyed San Francisco and Seattle. Many of these evil billionaires also displayed extraordinary philanthropy, Many have taken the giving pledge. Well, yeah, they can afford to. Others support community organizations like the Robin Hood Foundation, as of Paul T. Jones. He's number 153 on the list in New York. Others like Gates. Well, yeah, Gates, like the Clinton Foundation, manipulated various things, HIV, malaria, but most of the work that they do goes to these NGOs, and NGOs get most of the money. Not all, but most. What's the future of the rich on politics? Wealthy libertarians and conservatives like the Koch brothers, and, well, he mentioned Adelson here too. The funders of left-wing causes of indigencies by socialists and other leftists in the Democratic Party. They are not. The right has George Soros. He'll come up somewhere in this. Tom Steyer has spent $100 million to promote impeachment. He wastes his money, and his money could have been better spent. George Soros, who devoted even more years to left-wing politics. B.J. Pitzka, well, B.J. Pitzka is about Pitzka, multi-millionaire, he's governor of Illinois. His people, or his sister, was in Obama's administration. $42 million. Well, he had $42 million. That was like us giving $100 to get elected. As Steven Spielberg, who contributed more than $2 million to Democrats last year. Oprah Winfrey, who regularly camped. They talk about what Oprah Winfrey gave to, like in Georgia. Well, she can't do that. I'm sure since she's made over $1 billion doing that, if you use your wealth to advance progressive, you get a pass. No, you don't get a pass. G.B. Pitzka was condemned by many as being a millionaire going into a multi-millionaire going into the governor's office there. But the Illinois Democratic Party was in such bad shape that they literally needed a stimulus. And what did they do? Well, they finally passed the $15 an hour bill that we talked about. However, though, it's going to take 6 years. You imagine how insane that is? 6 years to get to $15. By that time, they probably won't even have a $20 bill. Now, when you go to the ATMs, I think the least you can extract from one is at least $20. Anyway, let me move on from this into our regular lineup. Check it out. Okay, where we are here. Oops. This is a New York Times article. I won't have time to do it all, but we'll talk a little bit about this 2020 Democrats embrace what's called race-conscious policies. This is by Herndon here, Armistead Herndon, on the 21st in the Times. From the first day of the 2020 campaign, when Senator Warren of the Commonwealth blamed generational discrimination for African American families earning far less, and that still goes on, than European households. The Democratic hopefuls, have broadly emphasized racial justice and closing the wealth gap. No doubt about that. A lot of work can be done there. Last week on a popular show, the Breakfast Club, Senator Harris of California argued with a host, suggesting that government reparations for African Americans were necessary to address the legacy of slavery and discrimination. Senator Harris later affirmed that support in a statement. We have to be honest that people in this country did not start from the same place or have access to the same opportunities. She said, I am serious about taking an approach that would change policies and structures and make real investments in the African community. Well, you can have investments in the African community. A lot of African communities in this country have had quote-unquote investments, but the idea is, like in Newark, the urban ghetto at the time, it's not that now, that Twitter King Booker used to preside over. His idea of investments there was to bring a hockey arena downtown. Now, that's an investment. He created some jobs. Most of them didn't go to people in Newark. and it creates jobs when they have a hockey game. And the Whole Foods he brought in, providing they take food subsistency, and the workers that work in downtown Newark for places like Prudential that are there till sundown, generally speaking, unless they stop by and have a quick one or two. Hopefully not like Mr. Kraft. But anyway, he stopped by a massage place, supposedly, and I don't know what he got there, didn't get there, but he was stung. We at this mic have always had great suspicions of entrapment, and there evidently the women that were working there were Asian, and they claim, well, they had some clothes there, so what? They had food in the refrigerator, why not? People do have to eat when they're working. And so forth and so on. And supposedly they claim they had some of it videotaped. Now, how would they get a video camera in? Anyway, back to Elizabeth Warren, reparations. The impact of slavery, no doubt about that, could cost a policy that could cost $1 trillion, and one that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, many of the top, have not supported. Well, they've supported various other programs. Let's cut to the skinny here. The Warren campaign declined to give further details on that backing, but that came in her call for a federal program to provide special home buyers assistance to residents of communities that are adversely affected by redlining. Well, that's been done before. We have enterprise zones. I mean, that goes back to Tricky Dick. Morally driven policy goals of Harris, and the Times is very interested. Today they're attacking Harris and Warren. Yesterday, or the day before that, they attacked Amy Klobuchar for being a bully, something like that. While the Democrats have long cast themselves as more inclusive than the Republican Party, grassroots organizers, DJ Trump did a lot of grassroots organizing. Many liberal votes of all races are now pushing officers to get officials to go further on policies of racial inequality, but inequality in general. But race-conscious politics could emerge as a future in a wide-open Democratic primary. Well, it will be wide open because we read that the March 2nd primaries, that is Super Tuesday, will now include Minnesota. I wonder how that's going to affect the Mississippi program of Amy Klobuchar. Two leading Democrat candidates have embraced the reparations, the concept that the federal government should both acknowledge an ongoing legacy of slavery and discrimination. There's no doubt about that. Julian Castro, but he's going nowhere anyway. And then some figures aside here. With these figures, I think with 2004, that for every dollar European family wealth an African American family is about $5. And old Twitter King Booker has something called baby bonds. Policies aimed to help poor children by giving them a government savings account that could total up to $50,000 for the lowest income bracket. Well, it's kind of like the earned income deal, but that goes for the whole family. Nothing basically new there. Urbana Maria, she's director of national policy director for Indivisible, says that many years of being after many years of being pushed by activists, the Democratic Party is closer to applying its liberal values of racial equality. Well, yeah, I know. But there are various others here also, and we won't get into all this, but basically, until America tells the truth about itself, we are not going to hell. That is from Ocasio-Cortez, said in a forum with Taishi Coates, the writer whose landmark article, The Case for Reparations. Well, the case for reparations, John Conyers, who used to represent city of Detroit, used to introduce that legislation, goes back to the 70s. Will it ever come forward? We don't know. Evidently, the upshot, why so-called why whites have an edge over blacks, Don't you know? And this is actually, I guess that was done. Psychologists at the Yale recently asked hundreds of Americans the same two questions for every, and this is where it came. Actually, it's 2017. I thought it was. So we'll have to do this at a later date. Let's go to our lineup now quickly. Muffle through it here, as they say. What have we missed? Bernie's 2020 map might be change without the never Hillary vote. Well, it'll be the never DJ Trump vote. We'll do this Monday night. Don't have exactly the time now. Roughly 1/4 of Sanders' support in the Democratic primaries and caucuses came from the never Hillary vote. They said. But also quite literal. These people who never voted for, well, some of that never Hillary vote went to DJ Trump. I'm not sure if it was a fourth, at least an aim for it there. A poll of more than 50,000 people conducted by YouGov in conjunction with Harvard University asked voters who they voted for in both primaries, why Bernie's primary voters, or what the primary voters did in November 2016. 74%, 0.3% voted for the monster Clinton, and 12% voted for the DJ Trump, 3% Johnson, 4.5% along with us voted for Jill Stein, and for other candidates they didn't recall 2.5%. Those who said they would have voted, 1.5%, didn't vote at all, 1.9%, almost 2% of the people. So really that just sort of tells you that if you look at the Barack Obama vote, a lot of people voted for Barack Obama in 2008, 2012. They voted for DJ Trump. So this is not as out there as you would think, benefited from the neighborhood. Oh, in red states? Well, yeah. And no, they're... we look at a couple of states. 31.8% of the voters in Montana. 16% voted for Bernie Sanders. That's in Montana. In Hawaii, 8.1% voted for Bernie Sanders. 25% were the never vote, and she got, 69% of the vote. It was about 18% for Bernie in Kansas. 26% were the never Hillary votes, but all these are quite high that voted for her. And West Virginia, he got 54.4%. In Oklahoma, this is what Bernie Sanders' share of the popular vote was in Oklahoma, 51.9%. And out of that, 21.9% there. In Vermont, of course, obviously he had 86%. In Idaho, 78%. This would have been in the Democratic primary. Did very well. In Kentucky, he had 46%. In Rhode Island, 54%. In Hawaii, 69.8% of the vote there. In Washington State, 72%. And, of course, in Massachusetts, 48% there. Is in the Democratic primary. He did very, very well in many of these primaries. 48.5% in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In Louisiana, oh wait a minute, yeah, 23% he got there. In Michigan, 49.7%, almost pulled it out. And in Pennsylvania, 43.5%. Wisconsin, he won that primary, 56.6%. In Connecticut, in New York, 42%. He would have gotten more had, and if you look back at it, 10% of that, 25% were the never Hillary types, and 10% were there for him. So in places like Texas, he got 32%, and 19.2%. And finally, the Mississippi, he got 16%. That was because he was not known at the time in Mississippi, and 14.4%. And we go back up his share of Sanders' vote, who were the Never Hillary types. Well, yeah, he got some of that vote there. In Mississippi, 14.4% there. So I think we're doing this pretty well. Sanders' map is tougher without the Never Hillary vote, no doubt about that. The good news for Sanders is the states where he benefited the most from the Never Hillary vote, especially in Appalachia and the interior West, had relatively low have relatively low delegate tallies. So places that he could potentially afford to lose, well, no doubt about that. In like New England, he'll be getting that. The upper Midwest, where Sanders, Amy Klobuchar could create problems in her home state. Well, she could, no doubt about that. Pacific Northwest, where Sanders preferred that candidates like former, Hickenlooper not enter the race. Hickenlooper is not going to do very much. I don't know about Inslee, what he'll do out in Washington State. But anyway, that's the story there. Incidentally, one of the chairs, a mayor of San Juan, Puerto Rico, Carmen Yasmin Cruz, is part of the co-chair of Bernie's campaign. This is from the AP, said in the statement that Sanders will offer path towards the resolution of many issues facing Puerto Rico, and including a new relationship with the U.S. Glad to see her there. We're going to do the polling. I'll briefly look at it here. This is from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Joe Lunchbox Biden is at 28%. At 20% is Bernie Sanders at 14%. Kamala Harris at 9%. This is in the New Hampshire primary is Elizabeth Warren. That doesn't bode too well for her. And Beto O'Rourke at 6%. He didn't start out right. But Twitter King Booker at 3%. Gillibrand at 3%. Let's see, Bloomberg. Klobuchar only has 1%, and Castro 1%. That is in New Hampshire. And these are various matchups here. In Arizona. Now, we expect that Trump's up by 12 over Bernie in Arizona. He's up by 9 over Harris in Arizona. And he's up by 11 over Elizabeth Warren. He has 49 to 38. This is in Arizona. And he's tied with Joe Lunchbox Biden. And let me just check here. Look at our time. Elizabeth Warren has moved one reparation for Native Americans. Well, Native Americans did in fact get some reparations in their various treaty connections. They didn't get it all, and also the treaties themselves have not been fully implemented. And if that is done, they will in fact get their reparations. Close that up very, very quickly here. The Ryan Zinke is grand jury examining whether he lied to the federal investigators. So that's coming up there. Let me just do the sports now. And from the NBA, we had the Wizards were at the Hornets. Wizards won 23 to 110. The Pelicans at the Pacers in Indiana. More precisely, Indianapolis won 26 to 111. The Pelicans. The Bulls were at the Magic. The Bulls won the game 110 to 109 by 1 point. The Spurs were at the Raptors. The Raptors 120 to 117. 3-point game there. The Pistons were in Atlanta visiting the Hawks. It was the Pistons 125 to 122. The T-Wolves were visiting the Knicks in New York, and they won the game 115 to 104. The Clippers of LA and the Grizzlies, it was the Clippers 112 to 106. The Nuggets were in Dallas, and the Nuggets won the game. Mark Cuban's not very happy about that. 114 to 104. And in an overtime game, the Jazz and the Thunder, Thunder by 1 point. The high-scoring game, 148 to 147. Let me just take care of men's basketball here. It's on Friday night in an overtime. Indiana and Iowa. It was Iowa 76 to 70, and Kent State and Buffalo. Buffalo 80 to 57 in the men's part of the NBA basketball hoops. And with the women, UCLA and the Oregon Ducks, it was UCLA 74 to 69. And Arizona and Stanford, it was Stanford by 2 points, 56 to 54. Butler and Marquette, it was Butler basketball powerhouse, both of these, 61 to 53. USC and Oregon State with Corvallis, 68 to 61. Arizona State in California 69 to 60. And Evansville and Drake of Iowa, 66 for Drake and 39 for Evansville. The hockey scores we will do. The Blue Jackets were at the Senators. Blue Jackets 3-0. The Wild were at the Red Wing. It was the Wild 3-2. The Avalanche and the Blackhawks. It was the Avalanche in Chicago, 5-3. The Ducks and the Flames. It was the Flames 2-1. And finally, the Jets of Winnipeg and the Golden Knights of Las Vegas. It was the Jets 6-3. This will do it for us. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on the Boston Red political side. Check us out on the RSS feed. We need to do some things for it. And those that are using the so-called smart speakers by Amazon, Google, and whomever else makes them, just say Boston Red or Numbers Man or Open Source Report or BR on the World. Anyway, we'll pop up there. And our special programming, we already talked about that. We'll have some tomorrow. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Good day.